Hey, so this that awkward moment where I'm like, do I start speaking now, or is someone going to give a thumbs up? I'm going to start speaking. Thanks, everybody. I can only see my other panelists, but I'm sure there's lots of people out there. But I've been invited in to, and I'm going to tell you a little bit of what's going on in life because it really does match up to what we're about to talk about. But I've been invited in by the PR company Clarity and the Conscious Advertising Network. And we're gonna, sort of run a discussion with some fantastic panelists on ethics and authenticity in communication. And I'm sure there'll be 101 little sprouts. I'm Chris Kenner. I'm the CEO of Brand Advance. I also have just recently joined the board of the Conscious Advertising Network, and I sit on a few other boards as well. I'm sitting on the diversity board of WFA, board of the Victoria and Albert Museum. It's so random, but they asked me, so I said yes. And a couple of other things as well. I'm a black gay guy, running a company that's trying to help reach demographics better. We are waiting for, I don't know if he's in yet, but we are waiting for Bonin. I think he's just plugging himself in and coming online. So I think I've introduced myself. I'm going to let the other panelists introduce themselves. And then I'll tell you a little thing that's going on today, because I think it's so pertinent to what we're about to talk about. And it might explain the very stressed look on my face as well. But go on, Abby, let me stop speaking and boring people.
Thank you, Chris. So my name's Abby Gibbons, and I am the Communications Director for ISBA. We represent about 3,000 brands advertising in the UK today, and we speak on their behalf to influence necessary change in the industry, so to government, to the platforms, etc. And my other hat is that I'm on the board of the Conscious Advertising Network as well, and ISBA is the official supporter of CAN2.
And Andrew.
Great, thanks Chris, thanks Abby. I'm Andy Saunders. I am a business journalist. I write for The Times and The Telegraph and Condé Nast magazines and Management Today and various other places. So kind of mainstream media on the whole. I specialise, I guess, in writing about the area where leadership and technology meet. Is how I would describe it. I got a kind of personal and professional interest in the subject that we're talking about today. I mean, my professional interest is that I spend a lot of my working life talking to C-suite people in big and small companies, and they are all worried at the moment, not just the marketers, everybody, all the leadership, worried about how to engage in these kind of social political issues. They know that their customers and their employees expect them to do that now, but they can't hide behind sort of corporate anonymity anymore, but they worry a good deal about how exactly to do it. They don't like getting things wrong, and they worry about the consequences when they do. They fear getting beaten up online if they put a foot wrong. My personal interest is that advertising funds my job essentially. I like to think of myself as a reasonably responsible journalist, and without the advertising revenue that sits beside the content that I write, the publications that I write for would have a hard time, and indeed some of them are having a hard time at the moment. So I think how to square that circle between advertising and editorial, and how to get the advertising right so that it funds the right kind of journalism. It doesn't appear alongside the wrong kind of material. That's a really hot topic at the moment, and it's proving quite tricky to get that right.
And from the other side of the pond, we've got Felicia, and I think Bonin in as well. But Felicia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Felicia Carmichael. I'm a Canadian American. I come from a background of media agency experience and nonprofit humanitarian experience. Currently, I'm working at the Ad Council. I'm a director of social and emerging media. I love tech and media consumption and providing value for audiences. So what we do at the Ad Council, we basically serve the public by dealing with issues that are critical to America as a whole. So social good and ethics are kind of my everyday job. And I believe that media and tech play a very big role in social good and how we operate it in humanity.
Great. And Ronan,
Hey
how you
everybody,
doing?
I'm good. How are you guys?
Yeah.
Bonin here. Yeah, so you know my background. I've spent my first 10 years building 2 global digital agencies, one privately held, the other one publicly held by IPG. I also ran their investment group, so I did like the first holding company investment in Facebook. I left the agency side because I thought clients were too dumb to buy good work, so I decided to become a dumb client. And for 5 years, I was chief digital officer of PepsiCo, and in the other 5 years, I was chief media and e-commerce officer for Mondelez, which used to be Kraft Foods. So responsible for all their media buying around the globe. I think we're the 7th largest buyer in the world at the time. Quit to become rich and start investing. And I met a guy named Rich on that journey who owned Sundial. And I helped him as chief growth officer. We took that business from 200 million to 300 million, sold it to Unilever for a little under $1 billion 12 months later. And then I have been continue to invest in companies ever since. And so we have a growth accelerator with a portfolio of 19 clients, investments. Most recent is Triller, who, if you guys haven't read, is kind of like the, I guess, shorthand for a TikTok competitor, but now we're number 1 in India, number 1 in Africa, and we're coming after them. That's it.
I'm glad I got to tell you what I've done with my life before Bonin. Otherwise, well, it would have just, you sort of had to listen to mine. So I think, you know, one of the main reasons why we're all here today is because the world, gosh, the world, where are we at the moment? We've got things like COVID, Black Lives Matter, Brexit on this side of the pond. We've got the rise of populism. And all these things, you know, are prevalent in media. They're prevalent in articles. And, you know, sort of take a few of them to one side, and then you've got COVID, and COVID has meant we've all gone a lot more digital. So reaching brands, etc., or brands reaching consumers is sort of having to navigate around or with any of these topics. And I think that's a minefield, you know. A really quick one, and is that, you know, that minefield, my company, 2 years old, today is the first day that we sort of slightly stepped on a mine, I suppose, in that there are a few articles in, I think they're called far-right publications, circulating at the moment. We run government campaigns. One of the campaigns had an ad above an interview with Wiley. Wiley is obviously all over the press at the moment for anti-Semitic comments as a British rapper. And so, you know, you probably will see people running past, but I have an office of frantic people going, you know, actually it's just an interview in the biggest black publication about a black rapper, but the government doesn't want to be next to, you know, somebody that said anti-Semitic comments. Where is that line? How does it go? So I want to go through and just, you know, ask each of the panelists sort of, why is it important for a brand to have an opinion? I think is the first one. You know, do you think it's important, rather than me put words in your mouths, to have an opinion and to get out of their comfort zones? And, you know, do they need to align with important issues or not align?
Yeah, I mean, broadcasting, communicating with their customers. And it's something that their customers want. It's something that their employees want. And to have a brand that just sits back and says, this isn't important to me, I don't think is a position that's tenable. That said, if brands want to take a stand, then there has to be authenticity behind it, which is obviously what we're here to talk about. Because it's very, very easy to get it wrong. And when you get it wrong, you get called out. So, you know, for me, yes, it's important, but we need a lot of advice, and we need a lot of education to happen within, you know, brands, their marketing departments, and, you know, as Andrew says, with their C-suite as well.
And, you know, good segue into Andrew. You're sitting sort of on the other side of the fence, I suppose. You're writing the article that might be you know, discussing one of them or all of them subjects. So, you know, good to get your views on why it's important for you to continue to, you know, it pays your wage, which means you can write more articles and call these things to account, I suppose.
Well, I think, I mean, there's always the kind of two sides, the kind of commercial versus the editorial. On the point of, you know, should brands have an opinion, or, you know, I think you know, Abby's absolutely right. You know, the days when you could say no, you know, that's not my business are long gone. I think all the stakeholders in most big brands expect those brands to have opinions on the things that matter to them in their lives these days. And you just can't hide behind the kind of corporate, but the brass plaque anymore. It doesn't really work. I think from the kind of you know, where I kind of, there's an interesting generation gap actually. A lot of the you know, feedback was limited. Essentially, they didn't get the same kind of instant and intense feedback from social that you get from social media. You know, they didn't really have that kind of engagement with their customers, and that has good sides for them because it does enable them to kind of get a handle on what their customers think and feel about things. But it also makes them pretty uncomfortable. You know, they're not used to it and they don't like it very much. So I think there's an element where they have to kind of you know, they have to get used to that world. Essentially, they have to kind of toughen up. Rather than you know, as a stone that is being thrown through their window.
Yeah, no, I agree. I'm from the other side of the pond, I suppose. You know, Black Lives Matter started the movement this time round, and last time round actually started on that side and then spread to here. So, you know, do you think it's just as important in the US and neighboring Canada as well for the brands to align with these important issues?
You know, I can since Felicia is a Canadian, I can, no, I'm just kidding. So I might be a Canadian soon too. We'll see. Like our elections are going to be delayed, which, oh God. See, it's hard you know, it's an interesting experience for me because just to give you context, Friday, you know, they start protesting and I'm like, yes, this is crazy. Saturday, they're burning and tearing down things. There's cars burning. I can smell it out my window or off our deck. And I see the protest coming down 7th Avenue. And you have an all completely white cabinet. And that was so specifically timed to share a message of what they believe America should look like, or either playing the bit, whatever it is. Tuesday, you wake up and there's nothing but black squares. And it's interesting. I had, you know, when I'm saying burn it down, I'm like, nothing's ever changed in the 42 years that I've been on this earth. I haven't seen anything change. So let's burn it down and hopefully we can start anew. Tuesday, I'm on staff calls, you know, daily stand up, and they go, Bonin, why don't you open? And I'm like, really? I'm so raw and emotional. And I just shared my story and said, the reality is that I still face it today. I came from Harlem. My parents separated when I was young. They later got back together, which is another story, but separated when I was young, moved to Harlem during the crack era. And to be perfectly honest with you, statistically, I'm not supposed to be here. And through my entire life, when I taught at NYU and I come outside after teaching the graduate school and I can't get a taxi cab, I used to chase taxi cabs down because they just would, you know, it's mind blowing. I have friends that couldn't believe when they would stand up to the side that cabs would just not stop for me. And then you walk into meetings and it's constantly assumed that you can't be the highest ranking person in this room, right? And so they introduce themselves to other people and say, hey, Bonin, it's nice to meet you. And it's just, so you face it no matter where you go. And then I asked my dad, who's 92 years old, Tuesday night, I go, what do you think? He said, nothing ever changes. So if in 100 years, almost 100 years of this man's life, he believes that nothing ever changes. That's kind of the backdrop that the life experience has. And then you think and you put on your like brand hat. Yes, I think brands have a responsibility. Those that want to be in my life and probably in the life of the consumers that they probably sell a disproportionate amount of their products to definitely have a responsibility to be in that and definitely need to have a point of view. And if you are not gonna, if you don't care about our community, then we need to know that so we don't buy your products. That's just the bottom line. And I think if you don't stand up, you're gonna be left out. But I think more important than that is, what does your business look like? Because what we're talking about is what are the true ideals? And the crazy thing, when I sit back and think about it, you know, it starts at home. It's like, what does the board look like today? And I bet you, at first I was on the end of that day, Tuesday, I was on a global town hall and they were like, okay, it was pre-planned before this. They were like, okay, things have gone a little bit crazy today. Kenya, I was like, of course I'm gonna say a few words. And one of the things I said is, I said, I'm not asking you guys to do this, but if you turned on the Zoom cameras, I bet you wouldn't see the diversity inside your own organization that you hope to see in the rest of the world. And it starts with, we have to fix the fundamental issues inside of our business. Representation, I think the mid-levels we need to fix, because one of the challenges is that when you have, you know, underrepresented groups that fly through the organization as high potentials, they hit a wall because there's nobody that looks older than them that can help and reach and pull them through. When I was 36, I was the highest ranking individual at a Fortune 50 company, black executive, sorry, at a Fortune 50 company. How's that possible? That's not, I think I'm really good, but really, like, that's not possible. You know what I mean? So we have to fix that. And then we have to ask ourselves as organizations, who are the people who we partner with? Who are our friends? What are our, you know, who are the people who we work with? Do they represent the type of diversity that we want? And then I think, you know, we also have to begin to invest in the communities of which, not where we just do where we live, but where we operate and do business. What are we doing to help actually drive change there? And then the last piece, I think, is realistically, we need to measure and track this. When we wanted to make tech-friendly companies, what do? We put tech people on the board. We knew that that works because we know that that board role can help drive change, and also it's the fastest thing that you can do. Trying to hire through, that takes a long time, but appointed boards, you can change that tomorrow. Look at what What's-His-Face did stepping down off Reddit. And then you also, when we wanted environmentally friendly companies, we asked them to publish sustainability reports. I think we need to have a viewpoint as to what organizations are actually setting their goals to be, and then how are they tracking to get them, or else we're never going to do that. If it was good enough for the environment, I think it's good enough for humanity. So that's kind of how I feel. Yes, they need to have an opinion, and they definitely, I would like to see them speak out and do that. Some are afraid, some don't know how, but I definitely believe that. But the bigger thing is that we have to look at the organizations themselves and ask ourselves, are they structurally, or are they changing to actually bring representation in? And that, to me, is what this era needs to be about. Not just actually talking, but actually taking action to change and create true systemic change. Sorry.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. Felicia, I think we can jump straight on to, well, just tell everybody actually what it is that, you know, your organization does, because it's awesome and we don't have it. And I don't know where most people of the 65 participants are, but just tell us a bit about what you do across in the States.
Yeah, so our organization is lucky enough, it's a nonprofit organization, to sit in a very unique spot to bring together platforms, media companies, brands, to talk about social issues, to tackle social issues. I think one of the most powerful things we've done recently was when COVID hit, within the very first days, almost within that first week of America going into lockdown or shelter in place in a few states, we were able to work with brands, work with marketers, advertisers across the industry to get messaging out there. And it was really powerful to see this one specific messaging to, you know, be home alone, but we're still together, and have all brands projecting that same exact messaging. So kind of everything that Bonin said in terms of having that responsibility, our organization actually is a vehicle to help brands and to help America in that sense talk about these issues.
You start one over here, please, because we need that. We need to have more togetherness. And, you know, going back to what Bonin said as well, I truly think personally as well that we talk a lot, you know, Black Lives Matter, still a big movement, happened 4 years ago, you know, 4 years ago, though, it was just Black people that were saying we matter. And then COVID came along, and low paid, low skilled workers became key workers. And we started to actually stop saying, I don't see color, and actually say, oh, I'm sorry, I do see your color now. And so, but we're still just talking. And I think, you know, for what you're supposed to do, you know, I think what you're doing, Felicia, what your organization's doing to help bring people together, bring companies together to push through that change. And then, but then, yeah, I think they need to look within and outwards as well, because I hate it when companies don't push forwards outwards, you know, don't represent me in their advertising because there isn't someone that looks like me in the office. You know, I think there's a balance of both. Andrew, I was going to ask you, what do you think, when, you know, who's got the responsibility for that change? Whose job is it? Who needs to make it happen? Is it the corporation? Is it advertisers? Is it all of us? I don't know.
Well, I mean, the kind of pat answer to that question is that it is everybody, isn't it? I mean, we are, you know, we're all actors now. We all have access to our own personal media channels, and we can, you know, we can be the change we want to see, as they say. But I think that's, you know, that's true. But some people have more responsibility than others, and I think that ultimately the responsibility comes from within the brand organisation itself. I think, you know, you can't be, you know, the days when you could basically kind of tell a lie in your external marketing or advertising, you know, project an image of your company that doesn't really is not authentic, it doesn't kind of match what it actually is. You know, you can't get away with that anymore, and quite rightly so. So the change has to come from within the organisations. They have to look at the, you know, as Bonnet and others have already said, they have to look at themselves and you know, decide what they are. You know, who are we? What are we for? Who are our customers? Do we represent our customers? Are we like our customers? You know, do we share their kind of lives and experiences, or at least do we know what their lives and experiences are? And I think, you know, the answers to those questions too often, particularly when we're talking about these kind of emotive social political issues, you know, the answer to those questions is no, particularly in the C-suite. They really do not have a clue.
Yeah. I was going to say that, you know, one of the most successful sort of working groups we have, which is where our members get together to tackle issues, was actually when we set up our diversity and inclusion group a couple of years ago. And we realized that there is an absolute thirst for guidance, for best practice, for knowledge on how to do exactly what you've just been talking about, how to make sure that your advertising represents the community around you, but also to make sure that you're not being tokenistic, that when you advertise something or say something, you've actually earned the right to say it. And that comes from your supply chain, from your employee base, you know, what do they look like, who are they, what's your board made up of? And, you know, and brands are genuinely the ones that, you know, that I know of and the ones we work with, they're genuinely passionate and interested, and some are more advanced than others, and some are still finding their feet. And as you said, you know, the work that Felicia does, it's organizations like that, like the Conscious Advertising Network, that provide our members with a view, an expertise to enable them to do a better job of being representative in their marketing outputs.
And going back to that authenticity point, I think it's funny because I think the same platform or vehicle that kind of accelerated brands' responsibilities in society, which they always have, but really what accelerated, you know, I think the forward-facing need for it is social media. For so many years, brands were trying to learn how to use it. And one thing that a lot of the platforms kept on saying is be authentic, you know, and it was this hard thing for them to be authentic, use your regular tone, you know. And I think that's the same thing that this moment is calling for. I think in those moments, what was told to brands, and maybe Bon, correct me here if I'm wrong, but look at your offerings, look at your community, kind of what Abby and, you know, Andrew had said. Look at your community, look at your offerings, making sure that it matches, and look at the values you've started internally and how they ladder internally. That's really what's going to make you authentic. is speaking the voice that you already have. And if you didn't have that voice, and if you didn't have those values, and if you were lacking, then this is the time to do that deep dive internally and as an organization to see what values you were lacking and start talking about them. Yes, authenticity will have to be, it's something that you grow, you know, so it's something that you earn almost from a badge that you earn almost from doing the work, not just laying claims or marketing an angle or being part of a discussion. So I think with authenticity, when you're doing it for social good or doing it outside of profit, I guess you want to say it that way, it really has to lean into your community. It really has to lean into your offerings and the values that your organization was built upon. And if those values are not there, it's a great time to start right now.
You know, it's interesting because Chris said something on our prep call that just, it changed it. Quite frankly, I don't want to be too crazy. It changed my life, but it changed the way I look at what just happened over the last 5 months. When you said we went from low wage workers to essential workers, it made me just realize, oh my God, for the last 4 months, companies have been benefiting from calling the people who they have previously treated very poorly by calling them essential, and everybody feeling really good about that. But the reality is when this is all over, they still go back to being low wage workers. Those companies still probably haven't changed their employment. You know, they probably haven't changed their healthcare issues. I mean, a large percentage of them are not just on the front line, but are victims of the virus because they're on the front line and they don't necessarily have the level of healthcare required for that. You know, I mean, and so it just made me think, you know, are we all sitting here and still fooling ourselves that what has really changed, right? So all that changed was that we spun a thing, and look, it was great, clapping, and it was great, and we would see the guys ride by and they'd be like, thank you, and it definitely is an emotional uplift, and there's no question about that, and we did a great job of branding essential workers. But the question is, have we done anything to invest in the change that we all realize based on the service they delivered to us when the class that could stay at home and get food delivered, you know, and so that just made me think like, wow, we need to pick that apart, not on this meeting at some point, but we have to also, as marketers, we have to remember that it's not just about what we show on television or what we put in social. It's about what we actually do to make the change, to make them not just tell them they're essential, but to actually truly be essential. So in general.
I totally agree. And, you know, if I have a short answer for what we've just done to all these key workers over here, essential workers in the US, we just laid them off.
Right.
Is what we've just done. They've just finished furlough and now there's no jobs. The economy is not doing so well. We've laid them off. That's, you know, anybody that says anything different is kidding themselves. But that's what we've done. We've clapped and said, okay, thank you for your service.
Juan's point again, honing in on that authenticity thing, is that's what being authentic is. You know, not just praising them in the moment where, you know, it's good for you to praise them. The authentic part comes in when you're putting things in line to support them systemically. So this talk about authentic could not be a campaign. It has to be an action. It's not a, you know, it's an action.
Yeah. No, I agree. I keep saying I agree, but I agree. I think, so we've talked about, you know, aligning brands, and I think as well, there's not aligning brands. So, you know, sort of regulation, content regulation, you can see my eyes glad, and I'm like, is there any keywords that they actually want me to say? But I know what I'm trying to say is, you know, regulation, number one, and then how that and who's responsible for it and how it is administered. Is that the right word? I'm going to ask two people. I'm going to ask Abby, because, you know, ISBA is looking after 3,000 people. And then I'm going to ask Bodin, because, you know, you're smashing it. Well, you've been smashing it for years, but you've got a tech platform that's going to take over TikTok, because TikTok's spying on us. I joke, by the way, it's a joke. But yeah, I think, you know, to get them both sides, because obviously, Abby, you've got to look after. So I'll start with you, Abby, if you, because you're looking after the interests of all of your members.
So 3 years ago, just before I joined ISBA, some of our members were front page news in the Times with brands funding terror, and their advertising was appearing next to some terror groups' promotional videos. And I think that was the first big public explosion of, wait a minute, there's a relationship between advertising and content, and actually advertisers do have a part to play in this because they're funding it. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on which way you look at it, the digital world has moved at such a huge pace that regulation just hasn't kept up. And, you know, you just have to look at how legislation goes through the House of Commons and the House of Lords to know that it's a slow process. And these people aren't experts. They don't understand the digital world. So the responsibility for regulating content ended up with the platforms themselves, who, you know, have had to make their own rules and mark their own homework. And as a result, issues still happen. Advertising still appears next to content which is hateful, which is offensive, which is far, far, far away from where those brands would want to position themselves. So that's why we have called for some time for oversight, which is independent, which sits alongside the existing regulation which exists in the UK, things like the ASA and Ofcom, which do a brilliant, brilliant job, but which reflects this kind of new world that we're living in. And the Online Harms Bill, which is going through UK Parliament at the moment, is a really big step in that direction. And you know, we would like to think we can come up with a kind of world-leading, cohesive process for regulating content. Something which, you know, addresses the issues that digital's brought, but that also upholds the massive upsides, you know, because they're real upsides. It's very easy to just kind of slate the whole system and say it's, you know, it's broken, it's a Pandora's box, we should never have opened it. There's loads of really positive good things. It's enabled small communities to have a voice, and, you know, and our brands want to be able to support that. But it's tough. It is tough. Yeah. You know, you try really hard. We produce loads and loads of guidance. The CAN manifestos, for example, really, really useful, practical stuff for what brands should be doing. And then we've heard them say it's like whack-a-mole, you know. You think you fixed it, and then over here another issue pops up. So it's critical, and it's really critical that we work together across the industry and with government to make it happen, because it's not going to happen if we all just sit there and carry on with where we are at the moment.
Yeah.
You know, first of all, Abby, thank you for the work you do. It's interesting because when I was leaving being a buyer, this was just when the brand safety really began to pick up. And I remember we were trying to be a pioneer in it with CARA, and we were trying to set guidelines, and there was not really a governing body or not even groups that could help you put lists together. So I fortunately, I guess, left because I know it's been a nightmare from there. But interestingly enough, I also think one of the pieces, and this is a friend of mine owns a huge content site, and was put on a blacklist, crushed his business. And when asked the tech group that's now creating, there's a bunch of groups that create lists, you know, and you buy against, they said, well, you have to pay us for us to review to see if we agree. And I just thought there's something wrong about that too. So I think it's interesting because, to your point, Abby, government is so slow, and it's a shame because the reality is that they're supposed to at least be a non-financially motivated group. And anyway, I think it's a mess. But I think philosophically, there's something that I struggle with around it in general. And I'd love, Andrew, your thoughts, being a journalist, and I get it, you know, the tension of church and state that you mentioned too, but the tension I have is I don't understand fake news. And I know this is going to sound crazy, but I get it, fact check versus that. But didn't we just used to call it propaganda? And wasn't the Bible considered propaganda at one point? And so, and I know it sounds philosophically crazy, but then I'm also just going to bring up one thing. A really good friend of mine, his father, probably one of the top 100 journalists over the last 100 years, and wrote a big story about one of our presidents. And it was clear that at that time, the president was going through dementia. And he had a choice to either write that the president was going through dementia or to omit that and leave that out. And so he had to choose between country and craft. and he chose country because he didn't want to put, and so, you know, we make decisions about how we put things out, and there are all different types of voices. I think one of the challenges is where is, and I get it, there's lies in those pieces and those should be, but we're also banning opinion, which all these opinions I don't agree with, by the way, so I'm not putting that out there, but how do we, who's the decision maker on these things, and how does that decision maker not have some type of biased opinion to begin with? And how does that, you know, like in some respects, can we truly be neutral? Can we truly create true separation of what is fair to have an opinion and what's not? I don't know. I wrestle with it personally. I think everything that's being done around brand safety is the right thing to do. But I think philosophically, when I step back and think about it, like, you know, the earth moves around the sun, that was like heresy. That was fake news, but it wasn't, you know what I mean? So that's the crazy thing. Sorry.
No, it's a good point. I think it'd be good, people that are watching, if you have any questions, to fire them into the Q&A, you know, and join the debate, because that very question, Brennan, is what I, as a CEO and my team, are tackling right now. Is, you know, technically an ad went above an interview with a guy that's been saying, you know, stuff that nobody agrees with, but it's just an interview. They've interviewed him and said, why did you say what you said? Now that for me is journalism, you know. Is that brand unsafe? Because that part is the interview about questioning, and, you know, which is what, you know, we need journalism to you know, to hold the democracy to account. It's how it works, you know. They call it out, and then the masses will decide on the next term round who should be in power because of the information they were given by, and I know that the fake news, that's the bit that can steer that information that then informs the choice that brings the political instability if it's the wrong choice. And it was, or the choice, what's a right or wrong choice? You know, was Trump the wrong choice? But he was a choice. He could have been made with false information, you know.
But you know, that's the thing is, like, okay, so fake news, right? Just going back to that. So you have what Trump's last tweet was, or not his last, I mean, his last, whatever. The last tweet was, let's delay the elections, which is psycho. But the one with, you know, about the woman and the vaccine have already been found, and the aliens and the whatever, like, right? Yeah. But when the president tweets it out, as it moves from what we might consider fake, it is literally the only real voice that we get as a country out to the public is Twitter. It was a genius communication stroke by that camp or him, whoever did it. But is it fake news, or is it the real positioning? Is it federally sanctioned information that's been put out there? I don't know. The president put it out. I don't know. That seems, in other eras, you'd take that as gospel, right? But now it's like, that's what I'm saying is the line has been so, now it's just propaganda, right? It's just been so blurred with the use of the word fake news, because now anybody can say anything they don't like is fake news. And we've lost the true ability to truly fact check, or to believe the fact checking. That's the bigger question yeah, anyway, I don't know. I'm
going to ask you another quick one. I know, if you were still at Mondelez now, and Mondelez spent so much on Facebook, would you have joined the boycott for Stop Hate for Profit?
I would buy more Facebook because it's cheap now. No, you know,
his views are his own.
Yeah. No, you know, I would, but I think that what I would probably have done was, look, I'm good. I was a massive buyer of Facebook, and I'm really good friends with a number of those people there. But I think what needs to be held to account more than just stop buying it is, we need to get in a room as senior leaders, like, you know, what's his face, P&G, Unilever, you know, the big buyers, and sit down with Facebook and understand, like, closed door, what's the reasoning? Why won't you know, and that's where I think is that you can pull the money. They don't really need the money, right? So, I mean, to be honest with you, what's happened is a bunch of the small buyers swooped in and got great pricing on Facebook. It's like all the DTC businesses is like heaven to them, and they're not above the radar enough for anybody to know that they're doing it. So they don't care. And Facebook, by the way, a lot of their small business buying is a lot of the profit, the majority of profit that they make. So yes, we're sending a little bit of a message, but I think the bigger thing is action. You got to sit down and take them to task. Understand them. There's a decision on their side that they're making. Why?
Felicia, there's a question from Liam. I hate reading questions. I'm going to try and read it. How would you advise brands to act when they have to pick between quick action and authentic action? That's a good question. And if they're really confused as to where to start internally, what should be their first steps? Because you were saying about, authenticity, but that takes time, but the action is needed now. So yeah, good question, Liam.
Well, I think a good example, I'll bring up a brand example that always, for some reason, since COVID has stuck in my head. Maybe not a lot of people saw it, but it was one that was really impactful to me. And one was a Dove when COVID happened. I could talk about all the great things that Ad Council did for COVID, but if we're talking specifically about brands, I think it was within the first couple of weeks, Dove put out I think it was a 30-second TV spot where it was just like, okay, you know how people meditate and it's great for your mental health and all that kind of stuff. They're a self-care brand. They had a 30-second spot that was just dedicated to making everybody breathe and meditate for that 30-second spot. And there was a countdown, and I just thought that was so smart. Now, that's an example of somebody that they probably didn't know what to say during COVID. It was really, really early on before people started to jump on the bandwagon and push things out and use remote production to film commercials. So it was great. It was a text ad. It was not fancy whatsoever. You could tell that they probably, once they had the strategy, they probably put together in less than 24 hours. But just the fact that they started with something that was authentic because it was within their wheelhouse, self-care, and that at that moment, what they did was step back and from the business needs and look at what does our community need right now? What does our consumers, our employees need right now? And that moment was breathe. We're going through a lot. This is like week 1 or 2 of COVID. We don't know what's going to happen. Everybody just take a second to breathe. And every time that commercial came on, I breathed for 30 seconds. And I remember Dove for that, and that's an example of sometimes you just got to do something. But if you are in that moment, look at, as Andy said, look at your consumers, look at your internal, at your employees. What do they need? Those are the people that are at the core of what you do. So, how do you infuse what their needs are at that moment back into your wheelhouse of what you do and make it make sense and make it valuable for everybody that, you're targeting. So I think that's a great example of something to do, quickly. But I think the answer is always going back to your wheelhouse, to your values, to your foundation, to your communities, whether it's internal or external, and understand what are they going through? What are their lived experiences? What do these people need? And make sure whatever your marketing or messaging says, that you are putting the work to make it authentic.
Yeah.
That's why you need to have, sorry, I'll just jump in there. That's why you need to have the customer in the boardroom, as we were saying earlier, because if the customer isn't in the boardroom, the board doesn't know what to do in that situation. And that's when they resort to, kind of quick and dangerous fixes, which may be, they may have a tin ear for what needs to be said. So that's why, that's why the customer really needs to be in the boardroom, so that there's an instinctive response in those situations, and you get it right in the way that your Dove example did so cleverly, Felicia. But if if the customer isn't in the boardroom, it's too late when the shit hits the fan to do something about it, because that takes a time to get that view on board. So that's if the customer isn't in the boardroom, you need to get them in there.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose when you're going to find that view within a demographic while there is some public thing going on, does it become a tainted view? Because if time has passed, they have been absorbed into whatever the problem is. Black Lives Matter,
yeah.
COVID, I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, you wanted to get it early enough that whatever response is given, whatever advice is given for you and your brand to move forward, it hasn't been tainted by the experience of what the problem was. you're trying to.
Speed is really important now. I think, you know, you've got to get it right, but you've got to do it quickly as well. And that's, you know, that's a pretty, you know, the danger in that, in those two factors is, you know, is potent. If you don't know who you are and what you're trying to say, when you're under pressure to say the right thing, you might not do it.
And what about your thoughts on, you know, the sort of first steps, Abby, coming from a, well, you're going to have to speak on behalf of ISBA because you announced yourself.
Yeah, I mean, it's really interesting what you're saying and using the example of COVID. You know, when that crisis first hit, a lot of our members were saying to us, you know, what tone should we be using? There's a huge, massive pandemic going on. This doesn't feel like a time to be flippant or jokey, or, you know, that we've got to get the right tone, but equally so we want to make sure that, you know, we are supporting what needs to happen during this crisis. And actually some of the brands that were called out as doing a good job were the supermarkets, because they very quickly had to shift to being sort of public safety experts, and why it was important for you to, you know, have a 2 meter distance gap, and why it was important for you to use brands and actually kind of reassure people that they could go into a supermarket and purchase things safely and weren't all just sitting at home not being able to go out, especially older and more vulnerable customers. So, you know, it's about your relevance to that environment and making sure that you're talking in an area which you have some authority to talk about and where you can make a difference. And I think, you know, we've talked about how, you know, these people became essential workers, and, you know, I very, very much hope that we do continue to see them as that, and to, you know, to put them as the ambassadors for these brands, which you know, our members do.
Yeah, and you know, I agree with you on supermarkets. You know, I love some of the stuff Tesco's did and Sainsbury's, etc. And going to Bonan's point, you know, well, mine and Bonan's point is they were, you know, within the ads, they were showing you as essential workers. They were showing you key workers over here, you know, and not just them, but we all now have, we can't look at a black bus driver the same again. There, you know, yes, he's driving a bus to me as CEO, but I might say it in my own head, well, I'd never drive a bus. That must be boring. Well, no, he gets up and loves driving the bus. Maybe he doesn't love it, but, you know, he kept doing it while I had the privilege of sitting in my, you know, nice apartment in London, hiding away, wearing a mask, going out for my 1 hour, and then coming back and not worrying about feeding the family or etc. because I was privileged enough to not. He continued to drive the bus. Tesco's workers continued to serve me and stock the shelves. You know, it's really important. And I think as well, I'd be wrong not to say it is also, whilst having brand safety, and it really is important. I agree with Bonan again on how it is important. You know, we need to make sure that we're not lazy with it. We need to make sure that we don't block me because I'm black, because that word might be in a few articles about gang related content, or do you know what I mean? Or you don't want to be next to the negative stuff about Black Lives Matter. So you block the word black or Muslim or Jewish or gay, or, you know, all these words that are high up on people's block lists. I get brand safety, but blocking whole demographics, blocking whole nations, it's not brand safety. It's lazy, and we can do better. We have the tools to do better. They're there. They're already done. You don't need to invent them. You know, I think that's an important point as well.
It's interesting, isn't it? Given the sophistication, the incredible kind of complexity and sophistication of the algorithms that platforms use to kind of target the content in the first place, it's kind of ironic that the brand safety, the tools that are used to kind of, you know, decide what goes where are prehistoric by comparison. I mean, they're so crude, and that's, you know, tells you something about the, you know, there's no reason for that other than because the technology exists to do a better job. It's just that it's not someone's priority.
Well, yeah, it's probably a bit more costly or whatever.
They're checking the brand safety box. Done. I got brand safety.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm padding out our last minute. You haven't heard much of me. It's been the panelist, obviously. I'm the moderator. But I'm just going to finish out with, I think, you know, brands and agencies and everybody in between, you know, and the governing bodies, etc., sticking things like black squares in their social, you know, and saying I stand shoulder to shoulder. We've already talked about the makeup of the companies. We've already talked about, you know, that they might not be quite representative. Even the person that posted it on might not be from the communities that some of us here are from. Brands and a majority, and certainly the boards, will never feel the pain that some of us on here have had at getting in the lift and, you know, a lady moving their bag to the other side, and then getting in the next lift, another lady moves a bag to the other side because a black man just got in, or going through security where you swiped through and then they ask you where you were going. But the 10 white people in front of you, they didn't ask them. You know, these little micro stuff. And then in the US, God, it's so much worse. Like, nobody sticks their knee on my throat. Although it did actually, there is a video going around, because it did, I think he's been sacked, but there was a Met officer sticking his knee on somebody's throat last week. So it's not like it doesn't happen here as well. That we would never expect a brand or an agency or anything to go through. You'll never know that kind of, you know, trauma. It's trauma. Your pain is the pain of change, maybe the pain of implementing new brand safe tools that allow you to advertise in contextual environments that reach me. Your pain might be the pain of saying to the board, you don't have to take spaces away from people. That's what it's about. Make 2 more seats. Tables can be elongated. Boards can be bigger. You know, it's not, and you don't need to lower your standards, because we just heard from Bunnan and Felicia, there are people of color that can do everything that everybody else can do. And sometimes we can do it better, you know? So I wanted to finish on that, you know, I think it's good, these conversations, it's good that people are saying they stand shoulder to shoulder. I know it's not always our place to talk about or to educate people, but we will, because we're in a privileged position where we can. We'll educate, I'll educate, then I'll tell you the second time to just Google it. But I think, you know, the pain for other people is the pain of change. It's painful, it's uncomfortable, it hurts. But so does all the stuff that we've been having in brands and agencies, and, you know, governing bodies can help with that, then please do. All right, I hope I'm at the end. I'm right on time, but thank you, everyone. You're all great. I could sit here for another hour, but they keep writing things in the chat box, so I think I meant to stop. But thank you all.
Thank you for having me.
No.
Yeah, thanks very much.
If I can just say one more thing, is that it doesn't have to be uncomfortable. It doesn't have to be where there's brands who have done it. Ben & Jerry's does it in a fun way all the time and has been. So let's not make it an uncomfortable and weird thing. Let's normalize it, and let's put action behind the things that we put out there.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks very much. Great chat. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.